Welcome once again to The Sage, and thank you for being with us. Today we continue a very, very important part of what we've been rolling out in the past few weeks, where we've been looking at the critical issue of nation building. It's so important. We had gone back following our call for unity, for love of country, for an improvement in our country, so that our common good indeed serves the common good. It was a journey, if you remember, we began last year, way before the elections began, when we put out a call of action. We have followed it through, been excited at the election that we had, in which we said it was probably the greatest demonstration of patriotism, given the large number of turnout in terms of voting and the huge youth involvement. The election itself has come and gone, but our country still needs to be built. And therefore, in that spirit, we go on to discuss how all of us, because each of us has a role, how all of us must continue to work, no turning back, to make this country a great one, no matter what is happening and no matter what is ahead. We've dealt with various important segments of our country that we felt were critical in this nation building. We had looked at the issue of young people's role, continued youth movement. We had looked at the issue of the important role of the family. We had looked at issues of media and art as nation building tools. And today, we turn to the topic of religion. Religion is so critical, so important in most people's lives, and has huge potential. I'm sure you agree with me. What should be the role of religion in building our country, in making it indeed a great country? What can we do? Who should we listen to? Who do we turn to? And I begin the series, a few episodes on religion, feeling indeed very privileged to have a renowned guest in this area. Before I introduce my guest to you, let me say that it will come as no surprise when he comes on set and speaks. Let me also say that I feel humbled and privileged to have him with me. He's a great man of God, a great servant of God, somebody with passion, determination, somebody who has achieved so much, and totally equipped to discuss this issue. Stay with me. When we come back, I will unveil our guest to you. Welcome back to The Sage, and thank you for staying tuned. Yes, our guest. As I said before we went on break, he's a man of passion, a man of strong views, a man whose record is unparalleled in terms of love of country and courage in addressing the issues we have faced in the past and today in our country. My wonderful guest is indeed Father George Ehusani.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Father George is more of a professional than any of us can ever hope to be in this business of reflections, of interviews, of discussions. And therefore, to get him to come and face the camera on the other side was no mean task. But a special privilege for all of us, so that he has agreed to come and talk about the thing that drives his life, his love of God, his love of country, his own personal conviction that things need to be done right. I can only do him justice by indeed introducing him in depth as he deserves to be introduced. So Father George Ehusani is the Executive Director of the Lux Terra Leadership Foundation. He is the founder of the Psychospiritual Institute, which trains experts in psychotherapy and spirituality, this in many English-speaking African countries. He was the Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat of Nigeria. He holds a Doctor of Ministry degree from Howard University, Washington, D.C. He has for several years been a member of the editorial board of the Guardian newspapers, a member of the Board of Trustees of the Center for Values in Leadership, the Nigerian Sodium Study Data and Safety Management Board, as well as the Institute of Conflict Management and Negotiation Analysts. He is an honorary fellow of the Nigerian Psychological Association, a theologian, a teacher, a human rights defender, a courageous believer in country, in integrity, in things being done right. He's also an amateur poet, a musician. Many who have had the privilege of listening to many channels like the Lumen Christi and so on would have in the past heard Father George perform. He has published over 20 books, written several journal articles, and presented numerous papers covering a wide range of issues, from the dynamics of justice and peace to the critical role of leadership for societal development. He runs 2 weekly programs on national television, namely Reflections with Father George Ehusani. I'm sure many of you have listened to those numerous and wonderful reflections. And also he does the Sunday homilies. He is recognized in Nigeria as a prominent moral voice and regular advocate for justice and equity, dialogue and mutual understanding, as well as a supporter and strong promoter of nonviolence and peace. His leadership formation programs, his pioneering psychotrauma healing training workshops, his justice advocacy, as well as his inter-dialogue initiatives have over the years been widely acknowledged. And as a result, he has received numerous awards, including the 2017 Konrad Adenauer Prize for International Development. Father George Ehusani, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I never thought this day would come because I've heard you in several fora myself, and I know how incredibly busy you are. And so I've been scheming to get you on the stage. And it's, this is indeed the day that the Lord has made. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Father, let me start. You've put in many, many years in this your passion, in this your service to God and humanity. And therefore, you're almost like an encyclopedia when one wants to look back and say, how have we done? Where are we going? And so on and so forth. Let me start with asking you, what do you think has been the role of religion in this, our country, in this, our democracy, in this country as we know it?
Religion has played a very critical role, as everybody will admit, in the evolution of our country from the very beginning to this time. I mean, before we came on studio, I told you that if you go back and look 60 years ago, so by independence time in this country, 1960, you will say that more than 3/4 of schools were owned by missionary organizations. There are states in this country that had only perhaps one government school or none, but a couple of missionary schools. So from Anambra to Kano State to Cross River State and Sokoto State, you would, before independence, you would have 3 or 4 missionary schools and perhaps 1 government school or none. So when it comes to education, religious organizations are unparalleled in terms of their contribution to educational development in this country. Go to health. The first clinics, hospitals, cottage hospitals that went to the remote parts of this country is missionary organizations. I mean, we hear, people know of the story of Mary Slessor.
Yeah.
In Calabar and then into some of the eastern states. And several parts of this country, it is missionary organizations. In my own part of the country, we had mobile clinics where they use buses to take workers to remote villages. Those were the first evidence of modern medicine, medical practice that people saw. It's mobile clinics. And the Catholic Church had a number of that in my diocese that went from one village to the other. You had even the general hospital in my town, Okene in Kogi State, was a combined hospital between the Catholic Church and the community.
Okay.
And the regional and the northern regional government, meaning the Catholic Church wanted to set up a hospital and the government was interested. So about 1957, 1958, they set up the hospital and it was called Combined Hospital, an enterprise between the mission and the government. One of the first secondary schools, first generation of secondary schools in my town is also a combined school. It is called Ebira Community Secondary School. It was the Catholic Diocese of Lokoja and the Ebira community that set up the school. Meaning, it is not only that the Catholic Diocese of Lokoja set up a number of secondary schools, primary schools, numerous, but a number of secondary schools, even to set up a government school, a community school, they actually played the leading role in getting the resources and getting the teachers and the management to set up the first community school in my town, the first community school. So, and this is replicated in many other parts of the country. Now, in the Islamic religion also, they played critical role. I mean, a lot of early education of children were the Quranic school, Quranic education. And then a number of Ansaruddin schools. It is from about 1970 that we now started having a number of government secondary schools. And then schools blossomed from about 1976-77 that the government began to set up, universal primary education. It is 1976 that the government brought out the policy of UPE, universal primary education. So in villages or in towns that had 2 schools, we could now have 6, 7 schools. Meaning that from about 1900 to, schools like Hope Waddell in Calabar were in the 1880s. You had Baptist high schools, you had all kinds of secondary schools that were set up before 1900 in Nigeria. And it was almost all missionary schools. The first government school will be King's College in Lagos. Now, in the last 40 years, we have had a number of government schools, but what it did, unfortunately, is to bring down the quality of education. Literally run down education.
Yeah, before you go into, I agree with you, but let me, agree with you, because I am a product myself, like many of us, of a missionary school. Yeah. Went to Holy Child Lagos. So for many of us, our memory is being taught by reverend sisters or whatever. And so what you're in effect saying is that for many years, the people who were educated were actually produced by missionaries.
So the missions played foundational role in the educational development of this country. And I also say in the health development of this country. Also in the social welfare, because missionaries, like the work that Mary Slessor did, missionaries opened the eyes of the people to the fact that killing twins is not good. Also, setting up leprosaria setting up vocational centers. Missionary agencies were involved in setting up a lot of projects for the common good at a time that people's awareness was still very poor about this common good enterprises. So not only schools and hospitals, but vocational centers, and also in stopping things like killing of twins. And so the development of Nigeria, the religious groups played critical roles all along. But you know that there was a rupture.
Yeah.
Something happened between 1970 and 1973, beginning from East Central State. They take over, the forceful appropriation takeover by the military government of schools. It was a fiat, there was a decree that declared all private schools built with the resources of the missions for the purposes of the missions taken over by government is one of the worst injustices in this country. That just by fiat, the military decreed that all those schools were now government schools.
That is great. And I want to now lead you on to my next. So what do you think is the situation today? What is the role of religion?
The situation today is that, like I mentioned, the rupture, for when it comes to educational development, there was a lull for many years. Until about the last 20 years, when there was a new policy to allow individuals and religious bodies groups to set up schools and universities. Some states returned schools to the missions, and then the missions now try to see from the wreckage of those schools how they can repair them. Then some individuals, a number of individuals now got into education. So you now have, if you take Abuja, for example, or Lagos, you will see that schools, primary, nursery, primary, secondary, and tertiary, set up by individuals, are now more in number than those owned by missionary organizations today. However, the missions or the religious groups still have a lot of role that they are playing. Religion gives people transcendental values, helps people to form or forge transcendental values that help them to live their lives on a daily basis. So the choices people make on a daily basis the choices are often influenced by their religious perspective, by their transcendental values. I remember that my friend Bishop Hooker used to say that when they say, oh, people are going to church, and yet the country is still as bad as this. And he says, let me tell you that it is religion that is preventing the poor from killing the rich. Meaning
well, that's interesting.
It says if you say, it's like people who say that education is expensive. So, well, if you say education is expensive, try ignorance. If you say that religion, that people are being religious and yet the country is this bad, his answer is that the country will be a lot worse without religion. That it is religion that is still so far moderating the anger of people. It is religion that is moderating the greed of people. So if you think Nigeria is corrupt and that people are greedy, well, just if there were no religion in our kind of society, then what we saw during the EndSARS is just a child's play. Because if there was no religion to help people to know that there is a supernatural life, and that if you are cheated in this world, it's not all there is, that somehow there is another life after. If you don't have that, what it means is that if you feel cheated in this life, you take it out on the one you think is cheating you in this life, by any means. So there would have been more violence. There could have been more corruption. Oh, somebody will say, okay, in China, other countries that are not religious and running well. Well, China has thousands of years of civilization, and the structures are in place. In this country, the structures are not in place. Sanctions are often not in place. So if religion is not there to moderate the behavior of people, the anger of people, then what can happen is a free-for-all, which we do not pray for. So even now, where the influence of religion In education, it's not as much as it was 50 years earlier. In healthcare, it's not as much as it was 50 years earlier. Even now, religion is still playing a lot of role because close to 90% of Nigerians either go to mosque or go to church regularly. And then the sermons they hear against corruption, against violence, against wickedness, all for fear of God, we believe it is moderating the behavior of people, because if you think Nigeria is in bad shape, then Nigeria could be in a worse state when there are no sanctions for evil behavior, when there is no police, at least no proper, we don't have much trust in the security system, not even in the judiciary system. So it means what is helping us to continue to stay above waters today is the consciences of people. And what is it that is helping people to build those consciences? It's the religious groups.
Okay, that's a very important point. The fact that the restraining factor.
The restraining factor of our sense of the supernatural, our sense of our transcendental values. Okay, which organization is as powerful as religion or religious groups in helping to form values? The values we hold about respect for life, dignity of human life, respect for the let's say the men, respect your wives, respect the female child that is as valuable as the male child, and so on. Religious organizations are the ones that are powerful enough to help form these values in people. Otherwise, the society has been so destabilized with colonialism and the destabilization that came into our society. The various socialization processes that we used to have are no longer there. People that no longer have these cohesive villages where they grew up and passed through rites of passage that formed a young girl into a woman, or a young man, a young boy into a girl, into a man. Those structures are no longer there. Mm-hmm. Therefore, if you go to check, you see that religion has been trying to patch it up, to fill the gaps, in order to help these youths to be people of character, to be people of integrity. Religious groups have been helping. I know that there's all kinds of charlatanism all over the place now.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So not all religious groups are on the same level in terms of their contribution to national development. You have in Christianity, for example, you have a lot of groups that are called religious groups that the preachers are more like motivational speakers. Well, it has its role. The motivational speaking has its role in helping people for national development. But I'm talking about religious groups that are into promoting integrity, wholesome lives, into promoting love for neighbor, into promoting authentic patriotism for one's country, love for one's country. A number of religious groups are doing that. I know they can do more. And I know that we can work on groups, those that I call, those that are not actually not qualified to, people who are not qualified to be called religious leaders, that are functioning as religious leaders. That's a problem we have internally as religious groups, because we don't seem to have standards. We don't seem to have accepted certain minimum standards for somebody to become a pastor.
A pastor.
And I think we will have to get there at some point. That not any standards imposed on churches or Christian organizations by the government or any agency, but self-imposed. That we set certain standards. That look, you cannot set up a church if you don't have this minimum qualification. You cannot lead a church if you don't have this minimum qualifications. I'm looking forward to Christians setting those standards for themselves. I'm looking forward to CAN playing a key role in setting those standards before we provoke a government to impose such standards for us.
Yeah.
Now, when those standards are observed, then there will be certain minimum requirements for religious groups to be involved in not just preaching the creed, in not just teaching people about heaven, but also to be involved in improving the circumstances of their life here on earth.
Yeah.
I'm talking about evangelization, but also social development or human development. Because the church exists to evangelize and to improve the circumstances of people as they live here.
Yeah.
That is why the early missionaries were involved in schools and hospitals and vocational centers. They knew that it is not only preaching the Bible, they knew that it is also, Jesus Christ says, as you did it to the least of my brethren, you did it to me. Matthew chapter 25. Therefore, that handicapped child, it should concern the religious group, that we have a number of handicapped children, that we have a number of autistic children, that we have children living with dyslexia. It concerns us because they are not able to live wholesome lives. They are not able to live dignified lives if their situation is not